So this is a video showing the various new features that come in the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Fantasy Grounds rule set Release 16. This is just a demo campaign I've loaded up, and I know I've got Release 16. If you look here in the chat window, it says PF2 Release 16 for the 2nd Edition rule set. When I'm starting off this, I'm going to be using some standard data from some of the actual DLC products. So as part of the campaign setup window that starts when you load up your campaign for the first time, just going to the next page, I'm going to load up some modules. I'm going to load up the core modules, and I'm going to load up the Lost Omens setting modules as well. So it just tells me what is loaded there. And these are all the GM modules that are needed for those settings. So whether if there's a player guide that contains different information, that's also loaded as well. So we've now got all of the data that we're going to need for this demonstration. If ever you want to get back to the campaign setup window, if you've closed it, you can just go to options and click the setup button in the bottom right hand corner. That's standard Fantasy Grounds functionality. That's got nothing to do with the Pathfinder rule set. Release 16 has a change to some of the data structures underneath. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, there's lots of individual sets of data that provide information to do with character generation, specific kind of operations, or something like that. Some of these examples are an alchemist research field, a barbarian instinct, a sorcerer bloodline, a wizard arcane school, a deity, a divine domain, all sorts of other things that are essentially a list of data that very often the players will select from as part of character creation. But it doesn't warrant creating a whole new data type down the right hand side here. So the system's being designed now to have this underlying data type called lookup data that can then be used for all of the things that I've mentioned and other things as well that come in the future, or that will be developed in the future. And this underpins a lot of that presentation of information. So within Release 16, there is one new data type down the right hand side, lookup data. So I'll enable that button. And at first in Release 16, we've got only 4 types of lookup data available in here: condition, deity, domain, and heritage. And these are all listed and have been added to the character Lost Omens character guide, the 2nd edition core rules, and they all present lots of different information here. You can see the type listed here. To see more information about the lookup data, we have a number of buttons here that are also presented during character creation. So if I want to see all of the heritages that are currently available to me, I could just select heritage data type in the lookup data field, but it's much better to use these grouped list buttons, as Fantasy Grounds calls them, grouped lists. And you click that, and this presents a subset of data from all of those, from each of those records, giving you a top-level view of exactly what these different type of heritages do. So a Forged Dwarf, it gives you a little bit of a description. It tells you a couple of features that you get as part of being a Forged Dwarf. If I wanted to see the whole record, I could click this, see the information here, and then also in this second tab you can see the features that you actually get, which will be added to your character sheet. Currently most of this doesn't have automation with it, but in future it actually will, and if there is automation, you'd see a little A actually appear there to the left of the actual name. An example of one that does have automation is the Unbreakable Goblin, who gets 10 hit points instead, and this is indicated here by just a little A telling you that there is actually some automation gets applied to your character when you add the Unbreakable Goblin heritage to your character sheet. And like I say, this will be expanded over time to have more automation actually there. Other data that have been created is deities. So these are all the deities from the main 20 core deities from the core rules, and all of the domains associated with them, again telling you description, the domain spell, the advanced domain spell. These will be expanded upon with the release of the Lost Omens Deities and Magic supplement, and that's primarily where a lot of this data has actually come from to support the information presented in that supplement. I've also listed conditions here, so if you want a quick lookup for a particular condition, what does frightened mean? You can do a quick look and see what the data is. For a lot of this lookup data, the other tab isn't used because it's just a basic record. The other tab would be used if there's actually some operation going to happen within Fantasy Grounds, or some additional data is going to be applied to your character sheet. So those are the main 4 that have actually been added in as part of the lookup data. Like I say, more will be added in future. So as an example of where this lookup data is used, I'm going to show how the adding a heritage to a player character has changed slightly. So I'm going to create a new character. It's going to be a goblin, so I can show you the automation around the hit points that I mentioned before. So usual thing, I add an ancestry. I'm going to add a goblin to this character. And as part of this, it says select Goblin Heritage. So it lists all of the Goblin Heritages available from the core rules and the Lost Omens character guide. Previously, I would have had to have clicked each individual one to find out what they get. Now I can just click the Goblin Heritage summary table, and it just shows me the heritages from the lookup data. So I can have a look through this and see, what's going on, which ones I'd like to actually select. I'm interested in the Unbreakable Goblin because, as I mentioned before, there is actually automation applied when I add this character to my character sheet. So I'll just show you that now. So underneath you can see that we've got the normal 6 hit points for a Goblin ancestry, but I'm going to select Unbreakable Goblin, and when I apply that, we see that it changes to 10, and I do my usual selection there. And the messaging in the charge end tracker has changed slightly. Remember, the charge end tracker shows the most recent messages at the top. That's just to make it easier to refresh and see the most recent information. So when I actually selected my ancestry heritage, it says, the Unbreakable Goblin's been added to Firestarter. Unbreakable Goblin feature 2 has been added. No automation is applied. So it's just telling me for the second feature there's no automation actually being applied. And it does show you the features here. The features have been added. So for the second one, basically it says, I've got to work out in the future. Remember in future that falling damage is for half the distance. So that's saying there. Goblin feature 1 was added. Automation has been applied. And we see that actually here for feature 1 that there's a little equal sign there that's telling us that a statistic has been updated. And we see that here that actually now we actually get 10 hit points for our ancestry, not the normal 6. So that goes through automatically. As well, because there's potential manual change to the system, we just get a note here reminding us that we've added Unbreakable Goblin Heritage, but some of those features may require manual addition by the player. As I mentioned, over time, the automation will be expanded on those various features, and there'll be less and less of these, check entry manually apply if needed. But this is just reminding you, as you're building your character, what you need to do manually, either to make a change to your character sheet now, or just to remember in the future that, in the case of the Unbreakable Goblin, they take damage from 10 feet when they fall 20 feet, basically half of it. So that's kind of the way the data is being presented there now. Additionally, as part of this, if we get various feats that allow us to add a heritage, either a second heritage or a heritage that normally isn't on our list, say if there's some home rules or something like that that allow you to select a different heritage that would normally be linked to your ancestry, you can now drag and drop heritages. So just an example here, I think there's a goblin feat that allows you to select another heritage, and so I can now drag and drop the Razor-Tooth Goblin. You see it goes through and tells you what's going on. Razor-Tooth Goblin features have been applied, so we now have essentially Razor-Tooth Goblin feature. Again, it says manually apply the data if necessary. You gain a Jaws unarmed attack, so you need to manually create an unarmed attack for that feature. So now you can drag and drop heritages into your character sheet if you need to apply different ones, or you can just select them as normally as part of when you actually apply an ancestry. So another aspect of the lookup data is that conditions are now added into the lookup data. You can review all the conditions here. All of the text of the conditions is actually available. You can do a quick search for frightened and see that data. That would then open up and you have a record. You can share that with the players or whatever. But other areas as well is that this now can be accessed quickly within your game time. So all of the conditions are shown in the effects window. It says, click to apply, alt click for info. So if I hold down the alt button and I want to know what invisible means, click that, I get a description of invisible. If I want to know what's confused is, I click that and I get the lookup data description of that condition. So we can quickly access that condition as well. Additionally, we can double click on a condition name in the combat tracker. So if this Bogart Scout was prone, so I'll just apply the prone condition to that. I can note that it highlights, and I can double click and find out exactly what the prone information means. So you can quickly and easily see what an actual condition means when it's applied in the combat tracker, or just get it from the effects window, or from the lookup window as well. You can get access to conditions that way. So there's quite a few ways that you can actually find out exactly what a condition means. Over time, we will actually add in some of the effects into this lookup as well, so you can get some information on the effects. But at the moment, it's just the actual standard condition descriptions from the Pathfinder core rules. So another thing in Release 16 is an improvement around the use of the multi-attack penalties within combat. So normally, most characters, they can set up their weapons. I'll give this guy a very quick weapon there. Do I get to the right place? So normally within here you'll have your weapon attacks, and you can edit those to actually set up the right values. If they're agile, they get these per attack bonus within there. You can change these manually, and then you can roll individual ones off there. Or if you are making rolls, you could use the multi-attack 2 or multi-attack 3 buttons from the modifiers window. But they were really primarily made for the GM to actually use that. A couple of releases ago, the ability to drag these modifier buttons to the hotkey bar was added. In Release 16, I've removed the icon behind there so that you can see the description better. Like with any Fantasy Grounds hotkey, you can edit the label on there and change it to be something that makes sense to you or something like that. So, but in Release 16, we have these multi-attack buttons that have been added to the top of the combat tracker for both PCs and for both players and the GM. It's more relevant to the GM because, like I say, the players have their attacks in there. But, so if a NPC is doing multi-attacks, you can click MA2 or MA3. You notice these all sync through to the modifiers window. So if this creature's doing their second attack, we can see it says multi-attack 2 -5. So that's automatically taking it. It's normally +13. It's now minus 5, so +8 if it attacked again. You see it says multi-attack 3 -10. The system takes into account if it's an agile weapon, so this agile weapon is normally +12. If it was a multi-attack 3, it's going to be +4 because it's just -8 because it's agile. So the system takes that into account, and that was there before, but you could only do it via the modifiers window. Now you can do it directly in the combat tracker. Additionally, in Release 16, there's this new effect has been added, MAP, multi-attack penalty, where you can change the multi-attack penalty beyond what it normally is. So this would be the base penalty. So this one, multi-attack penalty -3, is -3 for normal attack, and Fantasy Grounds will automatically make it a -2 if it's an agile, if the weapon has an agile trait. So that would be -3, -2, and then for a third or more, it would be -6 or -4 if it was an agile. So you can change this using this multi-attack penalty. This is also an effect that is targeted. So here I've got basically simulating hunt prey of this creature here. that has, multi-attack penalty against her hunted prey is -3, -2 with an agile weapon. So if I apply a hunt prey condition to the PC and I use this conditional effect, if target has custom hunt prey on them, we have a multi-attack penalty of -3. So I've targeted the gobbo. I'll do a multi-attack number 2, and I'll make my attack. And you can see that multi-attack number 2 is now at -3 because I'm attacking my hunted prey. If I attacked somebody who wasn't hunted prey, then we're just going to have the standard multi-attack penalty of -5. And showing you that again, if I have my hunted prey, if I did a multi-attack 3 or more, we're only going to be at -6 because of this multi-attack penalty of -3 per additional attack. If it was a agile weapon, Fantasy Grounds would take that into account automatically. So this dagger's agile, and it's only going to apply a multi-attack penalty of -4 here. So this now allows you to control and all of the multi-attack penalties of various different creatures within the combat tracker. Now there is a bit of a gotcha around this effect if a PC is using the effect. So I've essentially reversed the effects now on these creatures. So now Firestarter is the one who has the hunt prey on this NPC. So when I just attack them normally, normally for a PC you do your multi-attacks through the side here. And you notice it's just applying the normal multi-attack penalties that are coming from the multi-attack entries here within the PC sheet itself. So if you use multi-attack 2 or multi-attack 3 off your PC sheet, it's going to ignore these multi-attack penalties. However, if you it's not going to ignore them. It's going to combine them. So if you're using multi-attack 2 or 3 from here, do not use the buttons because now it's going to basically combine them. So it's going to tell you now, you have the normal -2, and then it's going to tell you have the multi-attack penalty of -2. So it's using the effect, but it's combining them together because Fantasy Grounds assumes that if you're rolling from the actual desktop here, from the PC, that's combining. So basically, if you're a PC and you're rolling from 2 or 3 on here, don't use the buttons. But if you want to use effects such as around this hunt prey, then you can use the buttons and just roll from the first entry. So now we're rolling the first entry. It says multi-attack penalty -2 because this was an agile weapon against my hunted prey. So just keep that in mind, that if you want to use the effects, then use the buttons and roll from the first attack entry. If you want to use the attack entry, then don't use the buttons, and effects won't work. Essentially, I will look into that in the future to see if I can make that a reliable way of overriding that and using effects, but essentially I think this entry in the PC sheet, because you can have exact control over what it is, that should override entries, kind of the standard buttons, because that's really aimed at the GM. But if you want to use these effects, it can make it a little bit nicer to have these targeted effects and stuff like that. Anyway, so hopefully that just gives you an idea of how to use these new buttons, both in the combat tracker along the bottom and in the hotkey slots, and using the multi-attack penalty effects as well. I don't think there's anything in the rules that actually says this, but I've programmed this in future just in case something might have changed. If you had, say, I'm trying to think of a good example here. -2, but your multi-attack penalty 3 was -3. You can specifically set the exact penalty for each of the multi-attacks within here by using MAP2 or MAP3. So that should all work. This is described in the Release 16 forum thread in the Fantasy Grounds forums. So if you want to go and just read up on exactly how this works as well, you can go and see that there. So there's been a few changes to the effects within Release 16. A couple of them are that, as requested by a few people in the forums, all actions now can be target self or the usual targeting. Previously, you could only target effects onto yourself automatically, but now you can do that. This can make it quite handy. If you had a heal action that just heals yourself, you can have like 1d8 heal and it targets yourself, and then if you actually click that, it's just going to heal yourself. Even though I've got somebody else targeted, self just overrides that. So that's one thing that's been added. For effects, you can now say that their duration reduces at the end of a turn rather than at the beginning of a turn, which is standard functionality there. Additionally, persistent damage now actually rolls the flat check after it's applied the damage to see if that's actually been removed. And also, once something is in the combat tracker, an effect is in the combat tracker, you can track DCs of that effect. So, example, if somebody aided somebody to try and put out if they had bleed, or if they had persistent damage due to a fire, normally that's a DC 15 flat check. If somebody helped try to put out the fire, you could reduce that to 10, and then that would automatically change the target of that DC flat check. It also allows you to track things like effects to do with say poisons or disease better. You could put the target DC of the disease in there, and other areas as well where a DC is kind of normally related to a condition, such like if somebody's grabbed the DC that they'd need to try and break out of that grab. So it's all sorts of ways of tracking DCs. At the moment, the only place that it's automated is for persistent damage, but in future it'll be used for to overcome other conditions and things like that. So, as an example here, I have my Goblin Alchemist Fire starter. So he's got Alchemist Fire that have just been set up as a formula within a spell class here, just changed it to formula. So as normal, I could target somebody, I can roll my attack from here. So, actually a miss, only 20 is a miss, really? Wow. So let's just pretend that actually hits. So Alchemist Fire does 8 fire damage. So I can just click the 8 damage there, so it's done 7 damage to Demiri there, but also it has persistent fire damage. So I'm going to apply that persistent fire damage to Demiri there. It automatically applies at a start, which is the standard feature, but that doesn't matter for persistent damage unless you actually want to apply a duration to that persistent damage. Normally, persistent damage will just go away once somebody makes that DC 15 flat check at the end of their turn, although the core rules do say you might want to put a duration of 10 rounds on here, just assuming that perhaps the bleed would stop, the fire would go out, or something like that. So if you want to do that, you can put a duration in there, and it's up to you whether you say it changes at the start or the end of the turn. That won't affect the actual functionality of applying and rolling for the damage. So now persistent damage is applied at the end of a turn. So when it comes round to Demiri's turn, she's got persistence 1 fire. At the end of this actor's turn, 2 things are going to happen. That persistent fire damage is going to be applied first, and then there's going to be a DC 15 flat check automatically rolled. So here we go. We can see that the damage was actually applied, and that they rolled 15, which is enough because that's against the standard DC flat check. So it says persistence fire ends, and that has actually been removed from Demiri there. I'll just show you that again, so that you can see what happens if they didn't roll 15. So they make the roll, and it rolls again. Might be here for a while, just trying to get rid of that. I'll put -6 in there, so they're going to automatically fail the roll. So it goes through. So yeah, of course, modifiers don't affect flat checks. You just have to change the DC. So it looks like I'm going to just have to keep going here until. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put actually a higher DC on that there. So you can see that will actually keep it there. They'll never be able to roll a flat check of 21. So at the end of her turn, does the 1 damage, rolls a 20, but that's actually a failure against a DC 21, so it remains there. So normally that would just be 15. If there's no entry there, it's going to use a standard flat check of 15. If there is an entry, then it will actually use that. So say somebody assisted this NPC to actually try and get rid of their fire, perhaps put a blanket on them or splash water on them or something like that, then we can say, reduce that DC to 10. And we can see that was a 13 against a 10, and that was a success, and it removes that. In release 16, these rolls will always be automatically made for the system. I'm going to look into a way of easier kind of making that and controlling that automatically to allow players to roll and add that as an option. But ultimately, I think if that's an issue for you, either just make the DC high, get the players to roll it themselves, and you can manually remove it if you need to. But I mean, if you just get players to be educated, when you press the next actor button, it's going to make the rolls for you. I mean, really, the difference between you clicking a button or picking up a dice and rolling it, it's not a big difference to me, but for some people that might be an issue. They might just want to roll the dice. So yeah, in the future I'll add an option, but in the meantime just put a DC above 21 for the persistent damage. For the persistent effect, just put a DC above 21, and that means it'll never go away. It'll make the roll, it'll never go away, and you can handle the roll manually. And the final thing to do with effects is that now Frightened will actually be reduced automatically by 1 at the end of a round. So we'll put Frightened on, when I can find it, I'm being blind. Put Frightened on Demiri. We'll actually make it Frightened 5 so you can just see what it actually does. So then Frightened 5 now, at the end of the round, you see it's been reduced down to Frightened 4. So that's going to keep going round. Frightened 3, Frightened 2, Frightened 1, and then when Frightened 1 needs to be reduced, it goes down to 0 and it's removed. And just like I've kind of showed for lookup data, if you want to know what Frightened does, when you've got the highlight, you can just double click on it to find out exactly what Frightened does. So at the end of each of your turns, the value is decreased by 1. So that automatically goes there. It has been mentioned in the forums that sometimes Frightened will never go below a certain value, especially if somebody has an affliction. That isn't coded here at the moment, so I suggest you just handle that manually. Unfortunately, it means that at the end of every turn you might just have to change that. But yes, essentially you just have to reapply that manually. And I think that's everything for all of the new effects that are available in Release 16.